Hey guys, today we'll be showing you some tips and tricks for drum and bass production. So we'll be covering some drum production and some bass production mainly. And here's the little song example that we'll be covering in this video. So as you can hear, it's quite heavy, it's quite gritty, but we'll be covering that from bottom to top and hopefully, get you started in making drum and bass. So when you start your project, you'll probably have a different tempo to what I have, but I've set my tempo at the bottom to 174. This is my bass project file. So once you set your project to 174 or 170, whichever you prefer, then you can start adding in your samples. So I was using some splice samples here, and I'm going to go find them now. So I was using kick 1 and snare 6 from this same pack. So I think it's paramount to get some really decent samples for when you're starting to produce drum and bass. You can obviously synthesize your own drums, which gives you that extra layer of control. But today, for sake of saving time, I'm going to just use some samples and a bit of layering just to show you how you can get some nice drums in drum and bass. So now that we've got a kick and snare, we want to put our drums into a regular drum and bass pattern. So I'm going to set my snap to 1/8. I'm going to put the snare on the 2 and the 4, and I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to put the kick just before the 4 here, and obviously on the 1s. So then you'll just get a pattern like this. So that's a regular drum and bass pattern there. So now that we've got our kick and snare, we're going to want to add in some hi-hats and some things to fill the space. So what I did then is I added a layer of addictive drums. So addictive drums 2, which is just what I use to add in hi-hats usually. So you can obviously use just samples or whatever you want just to fill the void, but I like to use addictive drums too for my hats. So now that I open addictive drums, I'm going to go to my metal kit and I'm going to find the kit that I like. So I like the Smack Attack for this song here, and then I'm going to then open up the sequencer here and then find where the hats are. So this is where the hats are, and this is where I'm going to start writing. So I'm going to paste in the MIDI that I wrote from the other track. So it's just simple alterations with the 8th note pattern here just to kind of get a bit more groove. So if you listen now, if I solo, this is what it sounds like. Now I want these hats to feel a bit tighter, so I'm going to go into the edit mode and I'm going to find the hi-hat here. And I'm going to go to the volume envelope and I'm going to shorten this envelope a bit just to make it a bit tighter. So altogether, that should sound a bit more like this. That just kind of tightens up those drums a bit and gives us a bit more space to work with. I'm going to apply a bit of compression on this just to kind of round out these hats a bit. And there we go. Next we're going to be adding the break layer, and for this tune I wanted to go with a more rocky kind of drum set, so I didn't go for more of a shuffle. I went for a more straight pattern, which I found that this break here, D&B break 53, fit quite nicely. So we're just going to copy that in as a Rex loop here. So what we're going to do is open the device by pressing this little button here, and we're going to go copy loop to track so that we get the MIDI on the track. And then we're also going to click the enable loop playback so that this is unticked. Otherwise we're going to end up with some phase issues. Now if we play this all together without any volume adjustment, this is going to be quite messy. So we're clipping already quite a bit. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to bring down the snare and the kick just a bit so we have room to work. Also the hats and the break. Now, a very important thing for us to do is make sure that the transients of the kick and the snare in this break pattern do not compete with the transients of the kick and the snare that we've layered in. So the way we are going to do this is by automating the attack envelope of the Rex player here. You can obviously do this many different ways. You can do volume automation, you can do sidechaining. This is just a way that would be simpler for me to show in video for you guys. Okay, so first off, I want to get rid of the second kick in this break because I do not want that. And then again here, I'm also going to quantize the snares and the kicks just to make sure they're all in time. So there we go. Now I want to get rid of those transients. So what I've done is I've right-clicked on the amp envelope and automated it. Now we're going to add in a bit of an automation when the kick happens. That way we can get rid of the transient. So we're going to put the value to maybe around 50 here. And you hear that it kills that transient instantly.
We're going to copy that over to where the snare is. So we want the automation to happen just a slight bit beforehand, just so that that Reason has enough time to see that it wants the attack of this sample to be softened. And then we're going to copy it for each of the kick and the snare. So here, obviously, we've got a kick and a snare happening. Yeah, and we want this kick softened as well, and this snare. And then again at the end here, we want these two softened. Now just to make sure that we're not softening any hats unnecessarily. Yep. Okay. Okay, so now we have a soft drum break where the transients aren't overlapping. Now we can layer in the kick and the snare and see what it sounds like. It already sounds much better. If we mute the attack automation, you'll see that the transients might start to fight. It's a very slight difference, but you can hear that the transients are trying to fight for space, so it's better just to automate them out. So next up, I loaded in another copy of Addictive Drums. This time I wanted to add in a snare layer. So this is what the snare I found sounded like on its own. As you can see, it sounds quite organic, quite natural, but I don't want that transient fighting with the space again. So what I've done is I've gone to my edit tab, and then I've applied a volume envelope to the snare. So I've got rid of that transient with this volume envelope, and I've also made the snare a lot shorter. So now with that applied, it sounds more like this. So what I did then is right click this and bounce it in place, and it should give you an audio track here. And once you've done that, you can fade in this transient here and also shorten the tail up just to make the drums a bit tighter. And together it should sound a bit like this. Just adds a bit more of a natural layer to it. That's without, and then this is with. So this is what the drum sounds like with both these layers played together. Now, next I felt that the drum was lacking a bit of high-end bite, so I found a nice top-end snare here that has quite a bit of bite to it. So this is just a bit of a snare reverb tail. And what I've done is done a similar thing where I've placed it there and I've faded in that intro, and then I've also chopped the end off to give it a bit more of a tight feeling. And then together, if I bring the volume down to a manageable level, it should sound a bit like this. So with that all copied and leveled, it should sound a bit like this as a whole. Just to cover some shaping I did to the breaks, I just added some negative sustain on the low end and the mid range just to kind of tighten the breaks up a bit. So this is what it sounds like with and without it. Just a bit tighter. And then I've also obviously cut the low end. This is mainly cut from the side because there were some weird artifacts in the side. But I've also done a low cut to the entire signal here anyway at around 200 Hertz just to get rid of that kick. Now we're going to make a drum bus. We're going to exclude the kick and snare just because I want those unaffected. So we're going to add some nice reverb and compression to the break and the hats, etc. So I'm going to click on the hats layer, mix channel, and the break layer. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to route to new output bus, and that should give us a new output bus to work with. Here it is. So I'm going to label this drum bus. Now I'm going to open this up, and then while holding shift, I'm going to drag in a mixer. Now if I press tab and flip the rack around, I'm going to put the master out to the from device. Now we're going to use this drum bus a bit differently than normal. We're going to actually manually route the drums into the mixer there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the direct out of my break layer, and I'm going to pull this down, and I'm going to put this into the first channel here. And then I'm also going to do the same for the hat layer as well. I'm going to add this into layer 2 here. Doesn't matter which ones you do, just as long as you know where they are. Now we're going to add an RV7000. You can just go into the effects and get it from here, but I just used the one that I used in the actual track, and then that's going to map that automatically usually to the send. So if that's how you do a send manually if you don't know. And that way we can add in some send reverbs to the channels that we want. So for the DMB break, I want to send about 18 to this reverb. I'm going to leave the return around regular. And then to solo this, I'm just going to use the sequencer. So here we go. This is what it sounds like. Just a bit of reverb. And the hats, I'm going to send about 30 just to get them sounding nice and spacious.
So they will sound a bit like this. Just a very slight reverb there. So I'm going to do the same thing for the Addictive Drums bounce layer. I'm going to route that out into the mixer. And I'm also going to do the same for the snare verb layer as well. I'm going to do probably a send around 40 for this, for the acoustic layer, and around 36 maybe, or 30-ish for the snare verb layer. So that should make them sound a bit like this if I solo. That's with the reverb and without. Just a bit more space, and then the verb layer should sound like this. Now altogether it should sound a bit like this. Now what I want to do is add some multi-band compression to this drum bus. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my favorite compressors, and I'm going to add in a 4-dyne right here. This is a nice multi-band compressor in Reason. And what I'm going to end up doing is add this audio in from the mixer. So if you follow the cables, it goes from the mixer into here, and then the audio out should go up here. So this will be in route with that. So whenever I drag a device in, I usually hold shift if I don't want it to auto route, so I can do the routing myself. So now with all our layers in, this is what it will sound like running through the compressor. Now we want to add just some slight compression to each band. So I want to get about 4 dB of reduction here. So I'm gonna play with the threshold and the ratio a bit. And then on the high end, and then on the lows as well. Now that should sound a bit like this. I can hear that the highs have been down a bit, so I'm going to use the makeup gain knob here to bring it back up. So now the layer should sound a bit like this. So then I went ahead and applied a bit of a low cut on the group of the drum bus, and I also downed the volume a bit so that overall it will sound a bit nicer. So now altogether with the kick and the snare as well, this is what the drum bus sounds like. Snare is nice and punchy, yet still quite full, and overall it sounds quite nice. Now on to making a sub bass. So a sub bass is one of the most important elements in any electronic music track, and if you get that right, it's going to help you when it comes to creating the power of the track, because most of the power is in the sub bass. So if I go ahead and open up a Serum right here, we can make a quick, simple sub bass. So we're going to select the analog basic shapes wavetable, and we're going to keep it on sine wave. And now we're going to edit the wavetable here. So we're going to click this button here, which brings the wave to the FFT. And then we're going to start editing the wave here. So we're going to add in a few of these harmonics. Now you got to be careful with this second harmonic here, because if this is too loud, then your sub will start to lose definition. So if I pencil in a note real quick here, just so we can loop this. So around F, we'll just do a note here, and we can solo this. So if I bring this harmonic up, you'll hear that the sub starts to lose a bit of definition, and it sounds more like a bass guitar. So this harmonic needs to be fairly quiet compared to the others. Now this is sounding alright. On something like Span, this is what the sub is going to look like. Now I'm going to add in an extra layer here. So I'm going to open up oscillator B. I'm going to enable it by clicking this button here. And then I'm going to go to Analog Basic Shapes. I'm going to put it on a square wave. Now this time I'm going to enable the filter. I'm going to put it onto a bandpass here, bandpass 24. I'm going to enable B here and disable A, and I'm going to bring the frequency down to around 70 Hertz. Now that is going to bandpass this wave and make sure that we're kind of rolling off the fundamental and not interfering with the sine wave, but also giving us a bit more mid-range. Now we're going to bring the volume down a bit, and that sounds okay. Now to get movement in a bass, you want to make sure that the volume is consistent, but you can play with things like the pitch envelope. Pitch envelopes are really important in sub basses, and that gives you some movement in them. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to LFO2, and we're going to go to the matrix here, and we're going to go source, LFO2, put the target to global master tune. I'm going to set the amount to around maybe 30-ish, maybe 27, I don't know, around that value is decent. And we're also going to make sure that this is on unipolar. So unipolar just means that this bottom part here is going to be the root note. If it's on bipolar here, that means that this middle part is going to be the root note. So we're going to put this on unipolar, We're also going to make sure that envelope is ticked here so that it works as an envelope rather than an LFO. And then we're going to push this node here. We're going to double click somewhere here, bring this down to the root note, and we're going to add a bit of a curve. Now this is going to be a pitch envelope here. Now we don't want it to be too extreme, so if it's really extreme, it's going to sound like a kick drum. And if we bring it a bit more down, it's going to be a bit more subdued and what we want. We're also going to add a tiny bit of attack to the sub on the envelope just to kind of get rid of that click a bit. And there we go, there's our sub. We're also going to make a simple noise reese in Serum as well, so I'm going to drag another Serum in. And this is going to be the main bass. So if I copy the MIDI over so I have a note to work with. So to start, we're going to click up here and we're going to select analog basic shapes. We're going to make sure it's on the sine wave. And then we're going to go to oscillator B. We're going to enable this and go to analog basic shapes. And we're going to go to a triangle wave. Now, as you can see, that these are both 180 degrees out of phase. So as you can see, the trough here is meeting the peak here and the peak is meeting the trough. So we want to make sure that these are in phase. So I'm going to go edit to the wavetable and click this button here. And I'm going to set this and see this is on 180 phase. I want to put this to 100 and that will flip the phase there. That way we make sure that these are both in phase now. Now the phase oscillation happens when you have two sine waves layered on top of each other and one is slightly out of phase with the other. You'll start getting this pumping effect. So I can demonstrate this with these two notes here. You can hear that effect. Now we're adding the triangle wave because it's very similar to a sine wave, but it's so similar that we are still able to get that nice clean phase oscillation. And then after we've done that, we can then add on a distortion and bring the drive up to around maybe 76 or something. And it will start bringing in that character out. And there you go, you start to get that classic kind of noisy reese sound. We're going to add a bit of chorus onto it, so we're going to bring the delays down, leave the rate around, bring the low pass filter down a bit, and bring the depth down a bit. Sounds a bit like this. And then now we're going to add in a compressor. We're going to put it onto multiband mode. And we're pretty much going to leave everything at default, maybe push the mids up a bit. Now we want to add in a layer of noise on here. So we're going to add in a noise and make sure we go to analog. And we're going to do some air up circuit here. Now we want to put the phase up a bit, but we're also keeping the random phase at 0. And now when we have the two notes playing, this is what it's going to sound like. So we're going to get that really nice noisy resound. Now we're going to do the same thing as we did in the last patch for the sub bass with here. We're going to go LFO2. I'm going to set this to unipolar, set it to around 30 or so. We're going to add this to the target of the global master tune. We're going to go to LFO2 and do the same thing. And also make sure we set it to envelope here. And we get a bit of a nice attack to it. So that's the basis of this noise reese. What I then did is I went ahead and added some things like Fab Filter Saturn, just to add a bit of saturation onto the low mids and the mids. And then I also did some things like I added gain reduction. This is a nice compressor that kind of brings out the aggro in it. So here's the final reese I came up with. A nice noise reese that just kind of complements that dirty vibe of the track quite well. Now, usually in basses, I would high pass the sub off and cut it off just so I can add the sub in myself. But because this is a bass that is designed on phase oscillation, the movement of the sub is quite important to complement the top end. So I left the sub in on this one and I boosted the sub just so I got the right level on span compared to my reference track. So I'll show you how to do that at the end. So next we obviously want to start sidechaining the basses to the drums. So I'm going to pull out a sidechain patch that was done by Dorancourt quite a while ago, which is quite nice. I'll leave a link in the description for the video for it. And what we're going to do is we're going to whack that in. We're going to then pull the output out of this real quick to the from devices. And that way we're going to be able to hear the kick. Now we're just going to bring the length of that kick down, just so it's a bit of a very quick trigger, and we're going to bring the level up. That way that the trigger to the sidechain is extremely short and we're not going to be fighting with the length of the kick when we're trying to sidechain. Now we're going to remove that connection so we don't hear the ghost kick, and then we're going to start sidechaining. So we're going to go to our bass channels. You see here, there's my noise reese. I'm going to go to dynamics and I'm going to scroll all the way up.
and I'm going to plug it into number 1 here on this output. I'm going to do the same for the sub bass and every other basses that I've got in the track. So now that I've routed the sidechain, I'm going to click on the sub bass and every other bass, and I'm going to enable the compressor. So I'm going to turn these on with the peak as well and the fast on. For the sub bass, I'm going to just whack it all the way, so all the release all the way down, the threshold all the way down, and ratio all the way up. And then for the reese, like the elephant reese and the noise reese, I've done the same, but I've also done these to taste. So I haven't done the threshold all the way, and the threshold and the ratio I've also not done all the way. So to start sidechaining, I'm going to right click on Red Drum, and I'm going to go create track for Ghost Kick. That's going to give me a track here. And then I'm going to drag this up so that it's next to the kick and the snare right here. And then I'm going to press comma when selecting the Ghost Kick, so I get 2 lanes. And then I'm going to draw 1 lane here and add in a kick drum here. Then I'm just going to copy this over to where the kick patterns are. And then I'm going to do the same with the snares like this. Now with the snares, I don't really want the snares to be sidechaining the basses as much as the kick drum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to down the velocities of these a bit, so maybe around 60%. And there we go. And so to round out the sound, I added a bit of a limiter at the end here with ozone. So the reason I limited it is that I know where I'm sitting when I'm referencing other tracks. For example, my other track that I released recently, I know exactly where my sub should be sitting on span and my high end. So if I press my hotkey to switch between the two, I can see that my sub is sitting similarly. So learning your tools extremely well is really, really key to helping you reference things correctly and know where things should be sitting, and just getting a really, really fast and easy way to correctly level stuff. So I think that's all I've got time for today. If you want me to cover some more things in regards to the basses, etc., then feel free to let me know in the comments. I will be doing another video soon for Propellerhead, so keep an eye on that. And yeah, hope this tutorial helped you at all, and see you next time. Bye.